Welcome to the Insight and Intuition's regular panel webinars, More to Life Conversations. I'm Julie Soskin, Principal of Insight and Intuition International, and will be chairing the programme today. When we opened Insight and Intuition in 1996, our mission statement was to bring psychospiritual learning into mainstream education. This we achieved with our programmes going into universities, further education, colleges and other organisations. Education should never just be about cramming information into its pupils, but endeavouring to draw out their potentials. Today, our world is very different from 50 or even 20 years ago, with the internet, social media and other online interactions. And our children are growing up in an ever-changing world. What are our values? What are our spiritual truths? And what are the principles that we wish to inspire and inform? With our learned panelists today, we hope to throw some light on these subjects. And I now introduce the panelists to you. I'm very pleased to introduce, first of all, David Lorimer. David is a visionary polymath, poet and spiritual activist who is Global Ambassador and Programme Director of the Scientific and Medical Network, Editor of Paradigm Explorer and Chair of the Galileo Commission. His most recent books are A Quest for Wisdom and his collection of poems, Better Light a Candle. Wendy Elliott is engaged worldwide in working with others to promote transformational change across sectors. Her work encompasses the inner and outer aspects of all things that underpin meaningful human lives and vibrant communities. This includes an exploration of human flourishing and the need to challenge and transform systems that are currently undermining rather than supporting the optimization of human capacities and potentials. Janice Dolley has focused on adult spiritual awareness and development, contributing to the Open University, the Wrekin Trust, the Findhorn Foundation, Christians Awakening to New Awareness, and the Whole World View team. Her latest book is Awakening to a New Reality, Conscious Conversations Across the Horizon of Death. Professor Richard Bailey, PhD, works full-time as an academic professor at King's College UK and Michigan State University, US. He is interested in a wide range of spiritual issues and their relationship with the physical world. He has been involved with Insight and Intuition for many years, giving valuable support. That is our panelists today, and so without further ado, I will, I think, pass over to first David Lorimer.
Yes, thank you very much indeed, and good to be with you all here on the Sunday afternoon. I'm actually only about 40 minutes away from Julie. Rupert's here as well, which is very nice. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes on this theme of education for the future. And I like the subtitle, More to Life. You know, there's more to life, and how do we bring more to life? What I'm not talking about is the future of education, which is a separate issue. And I'm in fact going to confine my remarks to a specific aspect of education, which is not necessarily for the future, but it's for any time, namely the work I've been doing with Character Scotland, which I founded in 2009. And originally it was called Learning for Life. And the reason I called it Learning for Life is that I didn't want to use the S word, spirituality, in an educational context in the sort of official circles. But life is imbued with spirituality. So then it became inspire-aspire, and then it subsequently became Inspiring Purpose. And it's not currently being run, but I want to talk about the important principles that are perennially relevant for helping form young people. And in French, the word for sort of training is formation. And so there is a forming within any particular culture. On the Scottish parliamentary mace are the following moral virtues: wisdom, integrity, compassion, justice. Now, I often reflect that if politicians were to put these into practice on a regular basis, and the whole political system would be rather different from what it is. But it's impressive, though, don't you think, that someone, or a committee, no doubt, decided that these were the values to put on the Scottish parliamentary mace from 1999. And the context of this, of the work I've been doing, also in association with the Jubilee Centre at Birmingham University. And the Jubilee Centre is for character and virtues. It was for character and values, but then it transformed itself into virtues because it's informed by Aristotelian virtue ethics. And the way that I was working with this for 10 to 15-year-olds is that they had what we called a poster template, which they then filled in. And the first section was under various different headings, looking at which qualities they were good at and which they needed to work on. And so they'd write in a box, their answers to both these questions. Then they had to choose an inspirational figure, who inspired them and why. And then along with that, some inspirational quotations. Sir John Templeton, who I was inspired by to create this program, because he had a program called Laws of Life. He was a great exponent and enthusiast for quotations, which I am as well, because I think that quotation often sums up something in a sentence, which might take many pages to explain. For instance, one of the ones that was very popular with our students was, life is either a daring adventure or nothing. And this was said by Helen Keller. And when the students clicked on the biography of Helen Keller, they realized that their situation was a lot better than Helen Keller's, and they should just get on with it. And then, so looking at the virtues, there are 4 categories of virtues. There are moral virtues, and these are absolutely fundamental and central. They have to be the point of departure. Intellectual virtues, curiosity, critical faculties, and so on. Performative virtues, which are things like resilience, endurance, resilience, determination. And this is often what government means by virtues or values. They tend to focus on these performative ones. But the point about making moral virtues central is that you can be a very determined criminal. So you can have the nice, the admirable quality of determination or persistence, but used for the wrong ends, it's really counterproductive. And then finally, civic virtues, which is self-explanatory. And so each of those boxes that I was talking about, the 4 boxes where students were looking at their qualities, where they corresponded to one of these, the moral, intellectual, performative, or civic. And that's what really drove the Scottish curriculum. And I just want to mention that using virtues and values as one discourse for this particular, what I'm talking about here, but equally people use skills or capacities. And I prefer, putting values up front, because I think that they're so fundamental to what can be right, or what is right and wrong with where we are and where we might be going. That if we don't get our values clear, then we can't get anything else very clear either. And so what I've designed this to be is literally education from the inside out. So by providing a template and I'll just finish the elements of the template. Then I was just providing a structure for reflection of the student. I wasn't telling them what to think or how to think, but rather asking them questions, and then they answered them themselves. And then they realized that, in fact, they knew a lot more about who they were than they thought they did. And so the final part of the poster, this is page 3, would be a number of questions. What do you want to achieve in your life? And what do you want to contribute? And I always put these together because achievement is one thing, but contribution is something else. Churchill famously said, "We make a living by what we get, but we make a life out of what we give." And below all this, under the surface, if you like, is the whole question of what is a human being, and therefore what is education actually for? And I see two potential, or there are two almost, they're not totally, well, at the extreme they're mutually exclusive. But if you're looking at how people envisage human evolution, I've just come off the call for the great upshift humanity's sacred mission with Irvin Laszlo, where we've been talking about creating a sacred mission alliance. And there's a spiritually informed understanding of the human being, which is not present in mainstream science. So from a spiritual point of view, you're looking for a development of our qualities and transcendence, if you like. But from a scientific technological point of view, things are going in the direction of transhumanism. And the assumption behind transhumanism is that humans really are machines. And so we've got a few blips in the program. We need implants and upgrades in order to make us cleverer than we are at the moment. But the main thing that gets left out of all of this is the heart and love. And that's what's totally essential from the spiritual point of view. So if you're looking at more broadly, not just human evolution, but human purpose and fulfillment, then I think we can learn a lot from the near-death experience and what people experience in NDEs. And here's a new book that I recently read, which is called Spiritual Revelations from Beyond the Veil: What Humanity Can Learn from the Near-Death Experience, by a lawyer called Douglas Charles Hodgson, who's going to be speaking on our platform. And you find in all the NDE literature, the main emphasis is on love and wisdom, our capacity to love and our ability to evolve, to be wiser than we are, more compassionate than we currently are. So I think we have to have education for the practical side of life, obviously, of taking that for granted, the doing side of life. But we also have to have what the UNESCO says, and I can't remember exactly what they mean by this, is education for being. And that's really what I've been talking about here, is education of the inner, so that people can live their lives as a fulfilling life for themselves, for their families, and in the service of humanity. So that's what I'd like to say.
That's absolutely lovely, David. Oh, by the way, if anybody wants to ask questions of the panelists, would you put them in the chat? And when all the panelists have spoken, we'll get to the questions. I was thinking when you were speaking, David, that, you know, it's not just what we endeavour to teach or inspire, it's about the teachers and the trainers and the people that are doing it. And I was thinking we need Socrates here to draw out, you know, and not feed in, but to ask relevant questions for people to think for themselves, which is sadly missing. In my opinion.
Yes, I mean, if I just a very quick remark about that, Ian McGilchrist's recent Oxford University lecture on the future of the university he said that universities are places where you should be taught how to think, not what to think.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Any of the other panelists like to come in with what David said?
Why don't we hear from everybody first? Don't you think?
Okay.
Then we can come back on each other.
That's lovely. Thank you so much, David. We're now going over to Janice Dolley, who I've known for many years. Hi, Janice.
Hi, hello. I'll start by saying I've got a bit of a throat at the moment, so I hope I don't start coughing. So just a little warning. Thank you, David. I agree with everything you've said. I'm going to take a slightly different approach and focus on the future, really, and how are we moving towards it, and what's that likely to need of us in general and education in particular. So I hope that sort of counterbalances what David and others may be saying, because all these perspectives are needed, aren't they? So I started by thinking how to explore the needs for an era that we can only imagine, because society is changing so rapidly, we can't exactly know how it will be. And I was reminded of a former Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, Dr. Robert Muller. I don't know if any of you knew him. He's not alive now. But I was lucky to know him. And he was big on global education and education that was spiritual. And I was reading a bit of his as I thought about this talk. He was working mostly in the 1980s and the 90s, at a time when even then, he said 15,000 children are born every hour across the world. Every hour. And they're all going to need to benefit from our knowledge of humanity and of the world, the skills, and find ways of living a happy, fulfilled life on a planet that needs preserving. So he foresaw a sort of global classroom and the absolute need for the 21st century to be a spiritual century. And I can remember him saying, if it wasn't, it would have no hope of continuing as a whole century. It was the only way through for the future, really. So I suppose that's my sort of starting point. But we've always had change. It's just that it's so rapid now. I started working for the Open University when it began. That was 1970. And even then, the courses that we wrote, and they were in print, so they had to last a while. Whereas these days, they're on the internet, they can be changed easily. We reckon a life of 5 years before they needed to be updated. But I reckon now, luckily, we have the internet. Changes are so easy. They'll need changing every year because things are moving so fast. I mean, bewilderingly, really. And quite recently, I heard a principal of a public school talking about how it was affecting how he led the school. And he was saying it's very hard to prepare young people for their future when most of the jobs they will be having don't exist yet.
Yeah.
So it gives you an idea of the rapidity of things.
Yeah.
However, we've had change all along. So I just thought about some of the changes that we've had quite recently, really. One, I think, is realizing that everything is energy. It isn't all solid matter. It's energy vibrating at different frequencies. And one of the people I work with, you may know her, Dr. Jude Caravan, one of her famous quotes is, consciousness is not something that we have, it's what we and the whole world are. So everything is consciousness in different forms, depending on the frequency of energy that it's holding. So that in itself is quite a big underlying change. And along with that goes the fact that is now really evidenced by science that we live in a world that is a unitive whole. It is just one whole deeply diverse, which is great, but also deeply interconnected, because it can't not be. So no wonder we're told to love your neighbour as yourself, because your neighbour is actually closely related to yourself. Then I think our ideas of what we call God have changed. I grew up in the Western Christian tradition, and somehow God was an old man in the sky, somehow, you know, and he would be pleased or not pleased or whatever. But I think we now know that this life, which is the divine life within all of us, is actually within each of us, around each of us, beyond each of us. And we are made, it says in the book of Genesis, as sons and daughters of the Most High. Therefore, we must, all sons and daughters, have quite a lot of the parent in them. So we must also ourselves have that divine nature. So I think treating everyone who's learning, which is all of us at different stages, as divine is another big thought. I think another change that has been going on is realizing the multi-dimensional levels of being. We've always sort of thought jokingly of ETs and UFOs, but I've been part of a group called, what's it called? Synergy Foundation, I think is the name. They've had a lot of people on exploring the reality of spacecraft landing, of other beings being here with us, actually, our connection with other cosmic centers. And that's a big shift. And at the same time, there's a shift going on where we're learning at subtle levels to communicate with trees, with there's horse whisperers with animals. I know people that talk to plants. And I was listening to someone from Australia talking about how she converses with water, the consciousness in water, which the Japanese Dr. Masaru Emoto was the person to really first discover this. So this is all expanding things that are going to be more in the future, not less. And we're also beginning to realize, and I suppose this is an area I do know quite a bit about, that this isn't just the package of life that we experience and then we've gone. That's the old materialist, hard science point of view. But that existed before we came into birth, and we will continue after we die. The book that Julie mentioned in the introduction is based on conversations with my best friend, which started 3 hours after she died. So I know very well that this does go on. And the very interesting fact is the first thing she said was, Janice, I can see what you're thinking. I can see thought. And then more recently, when my own lovely husband died about 4 years ago, that's exactly what he said to me. I can see what you're thinking. So the power of thought is something I think we need to ponder on. And David's big on looking at reflection, and I certainly agree with that. So as we look ahead, and certainly I'm not technologically minded, but there's the artificial general intelligence coming on at speed, talks of gravity-free craft, of med beds that can heal all sorts of things, and free energy. I mean, Tesla discovered free energy ages ago, but it was suppressed for not very nice reasons. So the changes which our children, and particularly our grandchildren and great-grandchildren, are going to face are bewildering if they go on at this speed. But at the same time, there is a global elite not wanting us to wake up to all these things, because we will not be able to be controlled if we do that. So I think we need to be aware of that as well. So learning to live in love, in beauty, in goodness, in truth above all things, which is not popular in political and economic circles these days, is as David was talking about, is really a must, that we have these values. So how do we educate for all these changes? I think it's a real good question, and the title of this little gathering was a good one, Julie.
Well,
my experience working with the Open University was that I had many students in the early days who'd been told they were rubbish at school and thought, oh, well, I'll just try and see if I could get a degree. And they did so well, you know, they just found the potential within themselves and studied studiously, but went on and did amazing things. So the potential within humans, I don't think, has been tapped fully. It's been rather capped by our own ideas. But if it was released, just think what. On that sort of topic, one of my favourite books is called The Spark. And it's a mother writing about her 2-year-old son who, when he was 2, she was told, look, he will never learn even the alphabet. He's not up to it, you know. So don't send him to this little beginning playgroup school anymore. It really isn't worth our while. She would not sit down under that. And she spent a lot of time with him, following him and seeing how he observed things. And to cut the whole story short, by 9 years old, he was teaching astrophysics to university students.
wow.
So that's, you know, that shows you the potential is there within everyone. It just needs fostering and bringing out, because everyone's got different ways of expressing it.
Yeah. That's
So
so
this sort
true.
of potential, I think, is significant for us to really appreciate. And then going back to the Bible, Jesus says, greater things than I do shall you do also. Well, have we really thought about that? You know, that's quite something, isn't it? Now, a while ago, I read a book by Alvin Toffler called Future Shock. And that was, well, it was a couple of decades ago, I think. So if he was seeing future shock then, I'm wondering what future shock's going to look like as we go into the future. So maybe one of the things we all, young people and all of us, need to learn is to really be resilient, as David was saying, and to be open to change constantly. Nothing is going to be set in concrete, because it's going to keep moving on.
That's so true, Janice.
And then, can I go on just a little bit longer? Is that
Yes.
right? Okay. I agree with David that intelligence resides in the heart as well as the brain. So we need emotional approaches at every level, because I think we need a heart-based society rather than a head-based one. I don't know if you knew Dr. Fritz Schumacher, Small is Beautiful, but he used to say humanity is now too clever to afford to live without wisdom.
Absolutely.
That's a nice quote.
Absolutely.
Because we need the wisdom of the heart to apply to all this clever head stuff.
Yeah.
And also, David's been very involved with Ian McGilchrist and the different hemispheres of the brain. And again, I think we need to take that on board, that the left rational cognitive hemisphere is there to support the intuitive, imaginative, creative. And in schools with very set curriculum and set ways of learning, a bit like factory learning, perhaps you could say, that's not taken into account. So one of my daughters is a teacher in a Steiner school, and they are very focused on the child's inner self and creativity. They don't teach formal learning until late 6, 7 years old. They're free to create and observe and just discover their own true selves, really, which brings us back to the soul and the importance of understanding the soul. Now, the soul, of course, can be nourished by values. I have a friend who's a head teacher at a primary school in West London, and I visited her school a few times. And values there ring out at you from every wall. There's pictures and words and you know, and it's a very warm, welcoming place. Now, to grow up in a school like that is such a privilege, really. But not everybody does. One of my granddaughters works on a farm where every week they have a group of kids who need some, you know, semi-delinquent sort of kids. But it's often because of their background. And she showed me quite recently a little video they'd made, which was one of the boys, I think he was about 12, at the end of the week saying, "This is the first time I've really known joy."
Oh, how
Now, to
lovely.
have to wait till 12 to experience joy, that shows you what some children are struggling with. So we can't sort of think it's all hunky-dory, because it isn't. So what steps have been taken? Well, I think Robert Muller, whom I mentioned earlier, devised a world core curriculum. This was a while ago, 2 decades ago, which would help us comprehend our place in an expanding cosmos. And his curriculum had 4 parts to it. Our planetary home and place in the cosmos was one. This would be one of the curriculum subjects. The human family, all about that. Our place in time, and the miracle of the human life. So that's another thing which could come on forward again, and get into education to help young people particularly grow up as cosmic citizens now, rather than just British citizens, which helps us to step towards the universal.
You've given us a lot to think about there, Janice, and I know we could talk for ages. I think your wisdom is lovely. So if it's all right with you, I'll move on and we'll come back to questions and discussions.
Okay, that's
a bit
fine.
later. Bless you, my love. Thank you. I'm going to go now to Richard Bailey.
Yes, hi, thank you. Well, there's already a lot of interesting ideas being presented. There's a bit of a break, in a sense, between spiritual education and other forms of education, and we come on to that in a minute. But I suppose when I was at school, there was a religious studies courses taught, and there was assemblies where there were hymns sung and even readings from prayer book. Well, possibly the world has become more non-spiritual, if in the sense of formal education. We've had several mentions of near-death experiences. They're almost a window to a shortcut to spiritual learning, I think, or to in a way of getting some aspect of religion which is spiritual. And it's interesting that these have become so widespread and interpreted by a lot of people. I think it brings us back to some central values, really. And we talked about communities earlier, the breakdown. I think community is very important. And of course, that's one of the primary aspects of the Bible, with Christ always emphasizing the value of community, meals together, and the disciples picked from ordinary folks, carpenters, if tax collectors are ordinary folks or not, I don't know, all those sort of people. But there was a sense of community, of ordinary people who could come together. And that's something, that spiritual side of education, I think, is a very interesting issue, because it's not really in formal education, which has become more probably based towards vocational issues. So there's a lot of different things to bring up here. Obviously, those sort of spiritual issues are related to wisdom, integrity, justice, moral beliefs, and so on. And if we leave them out, if we don't have a spiritual curriculum, then we're at danger of missing them out. And I've often thought that the basic school curriculum of factual knowledge, which we do need a lot of, we do need to develop skills and information, this can be lacking in a traditional school environment. I mean, I've often thought kids at school, they don't really know anything about citizenship, their legal rights, how governments and democracy might work, basic finance, responsibility for self and society, approaches of developing good mental health. These are never really discussed in any curriculum at school, and I think that's a mistake. We used to rely on spiritual side of it, which is again probably been reduced. And having taught undergraduates recently, large numbers of them sometimes, I feel they've changed a lot. Well, there's a lot of reasons for that, partly COVID, I think. And the other reason is social media. And I really do think they have more trouble communicating at a sort of personal basis. I mean, very difficult to say this as an older person. You think you're an old fogey who's going back to values that are not so relevant. But I have a sense that amongst young people who are so important spiritually, that they have lost a very big area or quality that was there beforehand. It has to be said, the outlook for young people is not so great as it would have been 30 years ago. The problems they're faced with, to some extent, that we have created for them, and that affects their feelings about. But if I think about the practical sides of this, one of the things I've noticed is that education now, especially higher education, is very much client-driven. People as a society, we seem reluctant to impose some structures on them. I mean, when I started working at universities a while ago, 30 odd years ago, this is true both in the US and the UK, there was much more government support for the education system, the university system. And it's something like 80% of revenue came from government sources and 20% from private. And now that's completely reversed. It's almost literally the other way around. And so we have also so few people went in higher education 30 or 40 years ago, about 6% in the UK. Now it's almost 40%, and that's changed society. And the universities are fighting each other for students because they want to keep up their revenue from teaching revenue. And so the emphasis is getting research grants and patents and fees from teaching. So the client-based aspect has probably reduced what universities feel comfortable in teaching, and so it's got further away it's gone more and more towards vocational and getting skills that would lead to jobs and economic value in that sense. So I'm sort of worried about it leading further away from realizing the sort of spiritual side and to some extent the potential. But having said that, I think from one of the great worries about society is giving people not only spiritual education, but the ability to think for themselves and interpret facts and information. So the development of fake news is a horrifying, widespread issue across different areas, I think. And a lot of that becomes from people's not failure to question things, like when you hear some news source, is this source reliable? How can I check it against other sources? Does it seem to add up and make sense? Because at the moment, fake news is widely used to dismiss political events that you do not feel comfortable with or somebody does not like. So we say it's all fake news. I've seen this on both sides of the political spectrum. And that's a really worrying development because it's not we no longer have a standard for judging what is a realistic thought or view. I think that's something education really doesn't deal with very well, and we need to sort of improve on it. Those learning for life and teaching virtues are very important. How it comes into the school curriculum is a big challenge, or university curriculum, or whatever. It's not something that in my experience, most students are not so directly interested in that. They really want to get skills and get a job. And that's in an environment where there's been relatively low unemployment, but they still feel that way. And not necessarily, we have to do a way, I think, try to develop means of getting interest in spiritual issues and moral feelings as well, which we're probably not really touching at the moment. That's a sort of big, we'll talk about that more later. But I've probably spoken enough. I'll leave it on to the next person.
Well, I think everything you said is, I mean, you're in the coalface, to use that awful expression. You're at the coalface of
Yeah.
with young people,
Mm.
you know, teaching young people. So you're seeing it firsthand, Richard.
Mm.
I think all you said is incredibly valuable, and we'll get to some questions later on. I mean, there's loads. I'm writing down notes here. There's loads of questions coming up. So thank you anyway, Richard. And finally, with our panelists today, I'm very pleased to introduce Wendy Elliott, who I've also known for some time. Hello, Wendy.
Yes, thank you, Julia. It's lovely to be here because insight into intuition was a big part of my path, and that we must be going back 25 years.
Yeah.
So that sense, I went into a period of like deep inner inquiry, and I had a very kind of extraordinary period in my life where it was just kind of an inner work that was catalyzed, and insight and intuition was part of that. So it became part of my interest in what does this being human actually all about. So I then went on to I became a specialist in early years because I then became very interested in thinking, well, if we are this rich, extraordinary person, and I actually believe that we are innately, if you like, spiritual, there is an intelligence that's trying to express itself through us, and a communication that's going on. What are the systems that we are brought into, and are they either supporting or eroding our ability to flourish? And I guess I have a 30-year inquiry into that. Are the systems that we are brought into inhibiting or improving our vitality and our life, if you like? So it's that sense of life. So for me, there is a relational intelligence, as I said, which is life itself. And for me, that encompasses not just the human being, but all life. So I think one of the most interesting things that's happening at the moment is we are moving away from this human-centric focus to go back to the ancient and indigenous perspective of human beings as just one species within a living world of others and a living sentient planet. And I work very closely with Jude Caravan now. So I was a co-author on the unitive narrative that's now attracting more and more interest, which is really saying this is one living planet, very much David Bohm's work, that this is one extraordinary living sentient planet, and we are very gifted to be experiencing it. So it's this focus on what is life, what's the expression of flourishing, which I think vitality and flow. So I've been spending my own time looking at various different aspects of this. I get very frustrated when people talk about education systems and learning systems, and very often early years is excluded, whereas actually that's the single most important period of the human lifespan, without doubt, because that first 5 years is when your ability to optimize later on is either sustained and nurtured or compromised. So, but I work across many different fields. One is education. So I think what I wanted to bring to this was reasons to be optimistic, I think. And let me see if I can share my screen, because I wanted to share with you, because I'm involved in, I can't share the screen, Paul. It says it's disabled.
Oh,
Should be enabled now.
Be the host.
Should be enabled now.
Yeah, hold on. Can you see that?
well done.
Okay. What I wanted to share with you, because I thought would be the most useful thing I could do, that on a global level, when we're talking about education, we are seeing significant change. And I think there is reason to be hugely optimistic, even though there's this period where we have to go from recognizing that we're coming out of a system that is certainly no longer keeping up with what's needed, but is actually now damaging to those that are in it. And that just doesn't mean students, that means teachers and all the people that are in a system that is simply no longer coherent with who we are and who we want to be and where we want to go. So we're seeing a big change in the global narrative, and that we're talking about UNESCO, United Nations, the OECD, like the really big players. I'm doing work towards the UN Summit of the Future in September. So there's lots and lots of alliances and very wonderful people who are all coming together as part of what David was talking about, the great upshift. We're seeing huge radical collaboration across movements and alliances of people who feel they're part of this big transformational period, and we're now all getting together to help this come through. So the global narrative is fundamentally changing. It's not that we've worked out how to get from there to here, because this is a period of hospicing, but there's this move to say we now really understand that education needs to be life-centered. So is it or is it not enhancing life and lifelong? So in other words, from even before you're born, because you start learning even before you're born, to the day you die, you are learning. You don't need to be taught to learn. You can't not learn. We're designed to learn. So it's how do you support? Now we're looking at, well, if that is the case, then what we've been calling schools and universities is only one element of that. And we're more likely to see different community-based centres of learning that will be much more fluid. We are increasingly seeing talk about this unitive perspective and this move away from the focus on the human to be more important than other aspects with other species and the planet itself. So not only looking at the damage we've done, but really understanding that we are supremely entangled with this absolute interplay of other organisms, and even our bodies are trillions. So to think of ourselves as separate, it doesn't make sense. We are trillions, let alone that we exist within a community and a planet of extraordinary beauty and intelligence. So we're seeing the shift to what it's the Thich Nhat Hanh who talked about interbeing, and now that's being picked up everywhere. That wonderful word I really like, because we do not exist in separation. We exist in a state of interbeing, and the more we understand that, the more we can realize that it is that kind of wings of a butterfly, that we are immersed and entangled in this web of interactions. So it's the move from languishing to flourishing. We're now seeing for the first time that the purpose of education should be flourishing rather than serving a global economy. And that's the first time we've seen that stated at high level. But education for the first time is not just to serve a workforce and a form of economy that's actually caused the situation we're in at the moment. But education should be serving human flourishing with the recognition that human flourishing is absolutely dependent on the flourishing of other species in the planet. We can't separate one to the other. we're starting to move from spirituality as something either that comes under religion or that you get taught about, to being innately who we are. And we've got people such as Lisa Miller doing wonderful work in this area, who's really showing that adolescents who are deprived of this sense of their, even though we don't use the word divinity and spiritual, if they're deprived of that innate sense of self and meaning, then what we're seeing is huge levels of depression and even suicide, because we need meaning and purpose within our lives, and we come in as these spiritual beings, and we go through our lives trying to it's almost like I like Richard Raw's work. He says we spend the first half of our lives building a container of our ego and who we are and feeling secure and building who we are, and the second half of our life really realizing that we need to release it out and celebrate who we are, but we only are in relation to what we bring to others, that we're the gift, if you like. The other things that are coming up are collective healing on an intercultural and interspecies basis, that in order to achieve what we want to achieve, we are a wounded culture. We're all wounded cultures. Colonialism, what we've done to each other, what we've done to other species. So there is recognition that we aren't going to achieve what we need to achieve without undertaking that on a global level, really, because we're just rolling forward these sense of separation and hurt, and we're seeing it in Israel, and we're seeing it with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The only way we will stop that rolling forward is to do this collective healing. So there's interest in that. Optimizing, this is what David was talking about, optimizing the best of what it is to be human. That goes back to the virtues and character is innately human. If you look at ancient and indigenous perspectives, there are innate values which are more to do with natural systems that are there before we learn the other ones. That there are values and character and virtues, which is how we can perform excellently in our social communities. It's how we can be culturally the best we can be. But actually, there are values that are to do with intrinsically who we are, because we're embedded in the natural world. And they are the ones that indigenous peoples have been so strong in maintaining: reciprocity, circularity, the certain gratitude. There are certain core values that are common to all indigenous peoples. And one of the things that we're trying to do is to say, well, how do we human well then? So if we were to take the best of the past and the best of the future now, what does it look like to be human? And what would be the principles and the values that we could all embrace in order to be the best that we could be? And I've put there becoming good ancestors. That idea that the single most important thing is your impact on the planet should be net positive. I just think it's a really easy thing to understand. Buckminster Fuller talked about it, that if we all just thought about things, whatever I do, whether I'm hugely wealthy or I have very little, but if I'm consciously aware that by the time I die, I want my impact on the planet to have been a positive one, the world would change if that was embedded. It's such a simple thing. And that comes back to that last point: you matter more than you think, that it is these tiny, small, mundane decisions that ordinary, everyday people make. It is the importance of where you buy your food, how you think about the other, recognizing yourself. It's understanding your inner world and your outer world. These are the things that it's millions of us and billions of us taking responsibility for those that really can change the world. So I actually feel very positive. Don't think this is going to be easy. I think we're in for a very difficult couple of years. The indigenous peoples would say these 2 years are the most critical, that we're now at that tipping point where if enough of us collaborate, and the good news is it really is happening, if we collaborate at this point of time to change the narrative and shift things forward, then we can move into this kind of what we hope will be a new age. But my goodness me, we need to. So yes. So I think that's
absolutely wonderful, Wendy, and I love your positivity, and I'm so pleased to hear what you're saying, that this work is hopefully coming to fruition. That's incredibly positive. And I'll just say one thing before I shut up. Several of you, I think all of you, have mentioned the fact that we need to think of us interconnectedness with each other and each living thing. And we have to stop thinking about the fact we're English, we're black or white, we, you know, what our tribe is. We have to start thinking of one tribe. And that is such a positive thing if we can do that, and we're all in it together. And I absolutely love the fact that you said about the gratitude of being alive. I say that to my students all the time, and I think it's because I'm 71, but maybe not. But you know, it's privileged to be alive. We are privileged to be alive. There's so many other things I could pick up, but I don't want to keep talking because I'd like to just open it up to the other panelists. Thank you so much food for thought here. Anybody want to come back with anyone else? Questions between the panelists before we open up to our viewers?
There are so many themes that it's hard to know, where to start, as it were.
Yes.
I suppose I could just say that in reinforcing what Wendy's just said, I think I might have mentioned before that I just came from the Irvin Laszlo Humanities Sacred Mission. And they were summarizing the feedback from the meeting which happened last weekend. And what I found, and I've seen this happen on a number of occasions in the last month or so, is that the AI has been used to summarize the various contributions that people have made, and put it into clear, simple language. And that's really quite striking, that we are capable of using this technology in a constructive way. And I'm in correspondence with someone who's got a kind of ethical AI algorithm. And I don't agree with his particular model of sentience and everything, but nevertheless, this is all the ethical questions that we're going to, or dilemmas that we're going to be faced with, and which we're already faced with, require the kind of deepening of education. And I think in relation to the pace of change, which Richard mentioned, I think it makes even more important that the rising generation have some sense of themselves as being a center of being, and part of the web of life, if you like, but they have a sense of being anchored in their own being, as opposed to being dispersed out there with their identity fragmented on social media.
Mm. And
then, in that respect, I think silence is very important, and there's the real lack of silence, I think, or lack of taking opportunities for silence, because all life has to renew itself. You can't just go on giving and giving, doing and doing. You have to stop and replenish.
Absolutely. I think Wendy wanted to come back on that.
Yeah, I'm just going to follow up on AI, because I agree with David. I think there's too much talk about the negative aspects of AI and not enough recognition that it's combining the best of human creativity, intelligence with what AI can provide for us. I think it's the combination of the two. We would struggle to do what we're the next phase without it. So I get a bit tired of people only ever looking at the negative, which I know is, the world we're in at the moment. Yeah.
Well, our last webinar, Wendy, I don't know if you know, was on AI, and actually there are lots of positives about it. I totally agree. Yeah. Anybody else want to come back before we open up to
I just think we've
yes.
mentioned lots of wonderful initiatives, but I think what we really need to all work for is greater collaboration between them all, so that they form a sort of movement, you know. Everything is needed, but I know that I've heard Elizabeth Sartorius, the evolutionary biologist, look at animal species, and when a species hits a real problem, like running out of food supply or whatever, always it gets through by cooperating with others.
Yeah,
it's quite interesting, and I think that's something we need to sort of focus on.
I think that's a really important point, Janice, because, and I think we are now being pushed. I think we are being pushed to do this, actually. And all the things you see going on in the world are pushing us. And, you know, we talked a little bit about spiritual transformation, and big transformations often come from crisis, as we know. And I think the world is in crisis and it's pushing us. And I think we don't have any choice. We're going to have to do this whether we want to or not, which is probably a good thing. Somebody else wanted to say something, I think that. Yes, Richard.
Yeah, well, Wendy, I think, mentioned we have to be guardians of the planet. That's one of the motives, one of the main driving forces we ought to keep in mind in our lives. But I suppose we also have to think this is the greatest opportunity for spiritual growth.
Yeah.
We don't really know what is exactly the purpose of some of our activities and intentions. So we have to be guided by a certain form of spiritual intuition, I think, in a way. And having, of course, if we do to evolve radically as a society, we're going to have to, I suppose, then I think the political side of it becomes important. And what I said earlier about the need for, you know, clear focused thinking and a certain amount of discrimination between different forms of news and artificial information. And one final comment, I agree with David about silence. Silence is a wonderful virtue practiced by many spiritual groups. And I have a feeling there's an interesting couple of books by Deborah Tannenbaum on, that's not what I said. And I've noticed, I think this is true. I think there's a breakdown of communication occurring of people not willing to listen, and the conversational styles have changed in the Western world. I don't know about the rest of the world, but there's a lot of people now who cannot stop talking, literally. And I don't want to fall into that trap, so we'll discuss it at this point, but there's lots of issues about what is conversation for, developing a community, developing relationships, or sometimes people almost use it as a weapon.
Yeah.
And I'll just leave them with that thought.
Yeah, I mean, I'm laughing. I mean, there's an expression now, isn't there? The echo chamber in the social media. And it's like that you have to echo someone else. I said to a friend of ours some years ago about having dinner parties. Oh, we must have a dinner party where everybody gets on and thinks the same. I said, no, it's going to be much more exciting if you get people with different opinions and different things. Then we learn, because we learn. Someone might say something, you think, oh, I've never thought of that. You know, I think it's viva la difference.
Absolutely. And I also think there's an element you have to be willing to listen and, you know, not interrupt and take it on board and then respond.
Yes, I think that's a lesson I'm still learning, Richard. Oh dear. Anybody else from the panel before we really must open up to other questions in a minute? I think you've all said such wonderfully interesting things, and I feel quite inspired and actually very optimistic. Paul, would you like to have a look? I haven't got the chat in front of me. Paul is a lovely man who looks after the tech. Any questions coming up there?
Yeah, we have one, and lots of very nice comments and appreciation from the audience. So that's really great to see. There's a question from Sandy, and Sandy, you can either unmute yourself and ask it directly, or I'm happy to read it out. I'll read it out, and then we'll see where it goes. So the question from Sandy is: I'm struggling to arrive at a definition of consciousness.
Oh,
What I think changes. Can you share your perspectives?
well, who do we go from there? Who would like to answer
Well,
that
I
one?
can I can
Yes,
jump in on
David.
that. I don't think it's helpful to have a single definition of consciousness. People, if we were in a spirituality and consciousness group that I'm a part of, we used Chat GPT to look through our 40,000 words of contributions and then pull out the ask the question, what is consciousness? And the important point that came out from that particular lens was the relationship between consciousness and spirituality. And that's because we're a consciousness and spirituality group. When we asked the Chat GPT to look at the whole internet and then define consciousness, then you get about 10 different definitions depending on which way you're looking at it. And so I think it's useful in exchanges to say what you mean. And from my own point of view, I think you have to distinguish between our individual consciousness with a small c and consciousness with a big C, which we actually also are, because it's, in my view, it's a universal consciousness or universal mind, which is refracted through the whole of life and the whole of and each human. And so that view seems to me one that and we all know what that is because we're experiencing it in every moment, and the different qualities of what we're experiencing. But the important point for me of taking that view is that we are one another, and which reinforces what Wendy's been saying. There's with interbeing. And I think this realization is gradually dawning on humanity as a whole.
Thank you, David. And thank you, Sandy, for the question. Have we got any other questions, Paul? Oh,
Yeah,
sorry, Wendy, do you want to
Got
say
two more.
something?
No, I was just
Wendy
going to
and
respond to
Janice.
the same question, that's all.
Oh, I'm sorry, go on.
No, I'm just going to say, because I absolutely agree with David. One is the universal relational intelligence, which is consciousness. And then from a human perspective, the state of being relationally aware. So one is the intelligence, the other is awareness. So I basically agree with David, but
Yeah, I think awareness is a very moot word in that case, definitely. Paul, have we got any other questions there?
Yeah, there's an interesting one from Stefan Hein. I'll read it out. It's what would you say is the relationship or state of affairs in the current global climate between Wendy Elliott's optimistic and positive elaborations based on her work and experiences in the UN, etc., and those very real technocratic forces who push for their agenda of transhumanism to continue to proceed? Is this a fight between light and dark forces in action?
Well, okay, who would like to answer that one? Wendy.
I think Wendy should have a go first.
no, I was going to say I agree. There's light and dark. I just don't think they're positive and negative. So we have forces at play. Had it not been for the forces that have taken us to this point, we wouldn't be doing what we're choosing to do at the moment. So I think it's much more interesting than that. I think we're in an extraordinary phase of evolution. So for me, this is an evolutionary phase of which light and dark are complementary, not positive or negative. And what's unfolding is moving us to a certain set of possibilities. So I just think it's not as, if you like, black and white. It's more interesting. David
wanted to say something.
Yes. Oh, did someone else want to say something? I do think the the dominant narrative. I mean, I do agree with Wendy that there's change in the air, and it's coming from left field, in inverted commas, or center field, maybe would be a better way of putting it. And the people who hold the communication reins at the moment are incredibly intent on narrative control, on controlling the narrative, in saying the narrative is truth. Anything that is not the narrative, if you disagree with the narrative, it's disinformation, misinformation, or malinformation. It just happens to be a code for disagreeing with what the narrative is insisting on. And so I think that for us to articulate a hopeful and empowering narrative to go against this narrative, or well, really, because I do think there needs to be some resistance to it, I think is hugely important, because I think a lot of people are feeling very fearful and disempowered, and they don't think there's anything they can do. They're not optimistic about the future, and it's our responsibility, as creative minority individuals, to give people a vision of what's possible, and then to see how we can collaborate and co-create our way to manifesting that.
Yeah. Is that helpful to you, Stephen? It was Stephen, wasn't it, that asked the question?
Stefan, yeah,
Stefan, I beg your pardon.
That was very helpful. Can I join? Can I say something?
Yes, of course.
Thank you so much. So I'm coming from experience teaching medical students in medical school in London, and this morning I was giving a speech on the climate crisis in the Unitarian Church in Hampstead in North London, where, David, it was exactly the content of the speech was about, we feel so disempowered in this current global climate of what's unfolding, and what does my little voice have to contribute to that? And I think sort of in conjunction what Wendy was saying about this light and dark, I did not ask this question in order to create duality, because we have so much separation and duality and polarization in our conversations with the current state of consciousness that we collectively experience and individually. And I think I need to somehow learn to embody these conflicts, these polarities in harmonizing, balancing ways. Wendy, what you were saying, like these tensions that are playing into each other in creative ways and creating something new. And I feel this embodiment is really, really important. I have to walk my talk of this harmony, of this balance of the forces when I speak to people about this and empower the students, and the people that come into my teaching environments, and to turn them on then to it's an energetic phenomenon, subtle energy body, I think very much intuition based.
Thank you, Stefan. I think your comment, walk your talk, is very relevant. I mean, I expect everybody on this webinar has done some meditation or whatever, or some self-awareness. And I often say to students, look, this isn't just for something you do on a Sunday, like going to church. This has got to be every minute of every day. I know that sounds tough, but I think we can all help that by, we all get irritated, frustrated, and all that stuff. Just take a moment, breathe, come back into your heart. I know, and the more you do it, the easier it gets. I'm not pretending I'm perfect, but I know how to do it, and I think that's important. And can I just say, a couple of you brought this idea of thought about, what does one person do? I think one person can do a lot. One person can do a lot in their living room, not about preaching and teaching, but it's actually about living that, exactly as you said, Stefan. It's about living that and being that. And I think that resonates out. I'm sure it does. Anyway, that's my 2 pennies worth. Thank you for the question. Any other questions, Paul? I think you're on mute, Paul.
Yes. Actually, no, there are lots of, as I mentioned, lots of comments and agreement on what the panelists have talked about, and a lot of compliments and gratitude expressed, which is great. So,
Oh, that's nice. Anybody want to say anything before we're coming to the end of this now? I must say it's been extremely interesting. Janice, you wanted to say something, my love.
I just think it's very important that we all learn not to dip into fear in any situation, whatever goes on, because that is going to be how a lot of people react to whatever the sudden news is. And if we can hold a still centre that is connected to our inner knowing, and know that in the end all will be well, you know, that's an important contribution you can do from your living room.
I think you're absolutely right. Fear is the greatest task really to overcome. And you know, but I think all of us can do our bit. Anybody want to say the final word?
Well, I was going to say more or less the same as Janice, that the dynamics here are love on the one hand and fear on the other. And fear has always been used by authoritarian systems to manipulate and control people. And maybe I can just offer one of my poems as a kind of statement in this respect. I'm just looking to see if I can find it just right now. It's a short one, and it's about standing. Yeah, it's and the context of it is I was, no, people won't know this, right? But in well, you do, Julie, the chair of Isis. You know the chair of Isis in above Rennes-les-Bains.
It used to be called the Devil's Armchair, by the way.
I know, the Fauteuil du Diable, but in fact that's just the kind of Catholic Church, version of it. And so this poem was, I wrote it the day we went to visit this with the group and it's called Standing Upright. Upright I sit on the ancient chair of Isis, spine straight, vertically aligned for grace, with columns of light descending, open to receive the strength of the spirit. The upright self stands up for justice, stands up for goodness, stands up for truth, resolute in intent, strengthened and anchored from deep within. So stand firm, stand still, stand upright, stand straight, stand in your power, deeply rooted, deeply grounded in the strength of love, deeply held in the sacred embrace of peace and love of life together.
Oh, it's lovely, David. Thank you so much. Because we're talking about love and fear, I just leave you with these images. One is love and one is fear. And I love these images because here in love, you're listening to the voice of love, of angels. Here you're listening to the voice of fear. Oh, I've got the wrong one. I should have given you the devil. Anyway, and I think just to illustrate what I want to say here, if I can find the card now. Yes, here we go. So in the card of fear in the tarot card, which holds a lot of wisdom, it's not just about fortune telling. In fact, it's very little to do with fortune telling. But in this picture, you see the chains around the figures are loose. You could take off the chains at any time. And I always think that's a great message for us. You know, when we have fear, we can take off the chains of fear and we can listen to the voice of love. So bless you for that lovely poem, David, and bless everybody who's been part of it today. There will be this will come out on YouTube in within a couple of weeks, hopefully. And just on a very practical level, to say to you, our next webinar will be near-death experiences and life after death. And I hope you can join us there. Thank you so much, everyone. Bless you all.
Right,
Go
thank
well.
you.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.